All right, so the second video just quickly discusses and reminds you about what nested conditionals are and how they work, as, to be honest with you, nested conditionals are one of the key components of game design, being able to purposefully plan how you nest all your conditionals together in order to make sure your game responds in an appropriate manner. So if you have not heard the term nested conditional, or your brain's a little rusty on what that actually means, a nested conditional is an entire conditional, so an entire if statement with its brackets and instructions inside, I gotta put my pen, of another if statement. And as I said before, game design is filled with nested conditionals. So here on this slide, we have an example of what two nested conditionals look like. You'll notice that we have a large if-else statement going on in this problem, but we also have conditionals fully inside the if and then fully inside the else. So you'll notice that these second conditionals are nested, or they are fully inside of the other conditional. You can see beginning to end, beginning to end. And it's important to be aware of these and how they work as we begin to trace through our code. Something else to note that I will be picking on as I start to read your code and help you and grade your project is that indentations are required in my class. So you need to use indentations to communicate nested conditionals, because if you come up to me with a bunch of conditionals inside of each other and no indentation showing their relationship of what's nested inside of what, I will make you go back and put in those indentations so that it is much, much, much easier for me to read. It's really, really hard to see maybe where a conditional, wasn't completely closed, or you didn't have the nested conditional inside of where you thought you did because you didn't write your code well. So note that these indentations, note that this whole conditional is indented in to be shown that it is inside of the other conditional. Now, I did want to show you an example of something that is invalid, as I've seen this happen accidentally before, and this is where indenting your code is so important. So if you look here, this whole chunk in red is meant to be one conditional. The problem is the way that they wrote it is they have their indentations in, but this other conditional ends here. If this was in a program, what your program would assume is that this conditional was all looped together here, and then this was a part of that first conditional. And that's really not what our intention was. Our intention is to do that entire part in red inside of that first conditional. So you need to be very, very careful. This is where indentation is really helpful, because I can see, okay, you intended for these to be matched up together, but we closed our first conditional a little bit early, and that would be an easy fix. But if we had them all smushed, the error would not be as obvious. So again, this is an example of an invalid piece of code that conditional in red would not function as you want it to. All right, the last thing I want to do is I want to model for you what happens when we have nested conditionals, and I'm going to use these values of 10, 3, and 30 for number 1, and 12, 3, and 24 for number 2. So you can go ahead and pause the video and do these on your own, or you can watch me trace through each set so that we know how we trace through it with variables and conditionals. So here for number 1, I have x, y, and z, and I know that x starts off at 10, y starts off at 3, and z starts off at 30. All right, so now if I come over here, x is less than z divided by 2. So if I actually take x, that is 10 is less than 30 divided by 2. That is true. So what happens is I don't run any of this else code. I instead know I'm going to focus on all of the code inside of the if. And then I go to the next chunk over and I say, okay, z is less than y times 12. So z is 30, and that is less than 3 times 12. And I know that that also is true. So I'm going to go inside here and run this code, and z is going to be changed to y times x, which doesn't actually change the value. But I can see here that I traced it through, and that's how it was in fact changed. Now, if I do the same thing with 2 other values, we'll see if we have a same or different result. So just to kind of reiterate what happened in that first one, I went through, I found that the first conditional was true, so I ran the code inside of that conditional, and then basically what I would have done is I would have skipped over the else, gone down to this very bottom part here, and then continued on with whatever code was left in the program. So now if I do the second one, I have X, Y, and Z. They start off at 12, 3, and 24. Now from here I go through the same code. So I have, okay, X is less than 24 divided by 2. Well, I know 12 is not less than 12, so I'm going to skip this code and come down into the else section. And then here, okay, I have 24 is greater than 3 times 10. Again, I see that I have another statement that is false, so I don't run this code either. I'm then at the end, and I would jump outside the conditional and then continue on. So at the end of the day, these three values are unchanged. Neither of those conditionals actually run, and as a result, that my values remain unchanged. They both evaluated to be false. So as you run through some examples with nested code, please note that you'll have to choose which conditional becomes true and which section of code your program will actually run, and then you would jump down to the bottom of that large conditional and keep going. So I will be asking you to trace through nested conditionals to do some practice with that, and let me know if you have any questions as you work. So at this point, you should be done with the videos for lesson 1, and you can now go grab the worksheet and do a little bit of practice.